In this lesson, you will solve problems involving percents. There are two different ways you can solve problems with percents. The first way is to use what's called the percent proportion. This right here is sort of the recipe you use. It's always the percent over 100 equals the part over the whole. And the words to look for to help you identify the part in the whole is, and of. The second way is to use the percent equation. The part is equal to the percent times the whole. Thing you have to remember with this method though is the percent needs to be written as a decimal. So our first example, 17 is what percent of 110? I'm going to start out by using the percent proportion. Since we don't know the percent, I'm going to put a P over 100. I use a P so that way I remember in the end I need to put a percent sign on my answer. So P over 100 equals 17 is going to be the part, and then of 110, that's the whole. So P times 110 is 110P. And then 100 times 17 is 1700. Divide both sides by 110. P equals, it's 15.45, and the 45 is repeating percent. Or if you wanted it to the nearest tenth, it would be 15.5 or 15.5%. So that's the first method. The second method is to write an equation. Basically with that, I just translate the words into the equation. 17 is where the equal sign is going to be. What percent? I don't know, so let's call it P. Of is multiply 110. So 17 equals 110p, or we're going to divide both sides by 110. And you end up with p equals 0.154545 and so on. But we have to write it as a percent now. Since I was looking for the percent, I need to write it in percent form. So it's going to be 15.45 repeating percent, or about 15.5%. You may want to pause the video and try the next two on your own. Using the percent proportion, I'm going to write 35 over 100 equals x over 48. Since it's of 48, that's the whole, it goes on the bottom. And then we have 100x equals 35 times 48. 35 times 48 is 1,680. Now divide both sides by 100. When you divide by 100, you move the decimal 2 places to the left. So x is going to equal 16 and 8/10. So that's with the percent proportion. Now with the equation, what number, I don't know, let's call it n, is, now with the 35%, we need to write it as a decimal. So 0.35 of is going to be multiplication, and then 48. So 0.35 or 35 hundredths times 48, and that's going to equal 16.8. You'll find that using the equation method is a little quicker most times, but A lot of students choose to use the percent proportion because you don't have to remember to change anything. You just set it up the same way every time. All right, next one. Percent proportion, 30 over 100 equals 23.4 is the part of what number we don't know, so make that your variable. So 30x equals 23.4 times 100. When you multiply by 100, you move the decimal 2 places to the right. So that's going to equal 2,340. Divide both sides by 30. And you get 78. Using the equation method, 23.4 is 30%. We're going to write as a decimal. Of is going to be multiplication. What number? We don't know, so let's call it n. Now if I wanted to solve this, I would divide both sides by 0.3. 23 and 4/10 divided by 3/10. That is going to work out to be 78. The next example, Carmela answered 23 questions correctly on her science test and received a grade of 92%. How many questions were on the test? This one, writing a proportion, I think is an easy way to do it. 92% is going to be 92 over 100. And then remember, it's the part over the whole. 23 questions were answered correctly, so that's the part. And we don't know how many questions were on the test, that's the whole. So 92x equals 23 times 100, which is 2,300. Divide both sides by 92. And you end up with x equals 25. There were 25 questions on the test. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to calculate the percent of change. The percent of change is the percent that an amount changes from its original amount. So it's how much it changes compared to what it started at. Right here is our recipe. The percent of change equals the amount of change, which you find by subtracting, and you put that over the original amount. Or in other words, divide by the original amount. So after you find the amount of change, you divide it by what it started at, and then you have to write it in percent form, so you're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right to make it a percent. In our first example, it says, last year the yearbook club at Wesley Middle School sold 174 yearbooks. This year they sold 200 yearbooks. Find the percent of change, round to the nearest tenth, and state if it's an increase or decrease. Well, the percent of change is going to equal the amount of change over the original. So the amount of change is the difference between the two amounts. So 200 minus 174 over the original, or the starting amount. So we'd go with last year's amount, which was 174. Well, 200 minus 174 is 26. So it's going to be 26 divided by 174. 26 divided by 174, that equals about 1494, and it continued on, but that's all we really need to know if we're going to write it to the nearest percent, or the nearest tenth of a percent. So now once we have this, we have to write it as a percent by moving the decimal 2 places to the right. So it's about 14.9% change. And this, in this case, it's going to be an increase because it went from 174 yearbooks to 200. So that's a percent increase, about 14.9% increase. Our next example, find the percent of change if there were 80 water bottles to begin with, and now there's 55. We're going to find the amount of change. So 80 minus 55. We're always going to just subtract the large number minus the smaller number. And then in the end, we're going to worry about whether it was an increase or decrease. So 80 minus 55 over the original, which was 80. 80 minus 55 is 25. 25 divided by 80, that is going to equal 0.3125. So it's 31.25%, or to the nearest tenth, it would be 31.3%. And this went from 80 to 55, so that was a decrease. The next thing we're going to talk about is a markup. A store sells an item for more than it's paid for the item in order to make a profit. So the store purchases the item for a particular price, and then they increase the price or mark up the price so they can make a profit. In example 3, it says find the selling price. A digital camera is $120 and it's a 55% markup. If it's a 55% markup, that means they're going to increase the price by 55%. So we are going to first figure out what 55% of 120 is. So 55% of 120. 55%, you could use the percent proportion method of figuring this out, but the quicker way is just to change that percent to a decimal. Of means to multiply. So 0.55 times 120, that's going to equal 66, which means they're going to mark up the price $66, which means we need to take the original price, which is 120, plus the $66 that they're going to mark it up, and that will give you the selling price of $186. So it was sort of a two-step process. We first figured out 55% of the price, and then we added that to the original starting point. Now there is a quicker way to do this. If something is going to be marked up 55%, that means you're going to pay 100% of the price plus another 55% of the price, which is a total of 155% of the price. And that's math that you can do in your head. Well, 155% is 1.55. So if we're trying to find 155% of 120, it's 1.55 times 120, and that ends up being $186. Basically, it's kind of a quick way to get to the same answer rather than doing two separate parts, because this part right here can be done in your head. 55% markup means you're going to pay 155% of the price. So 1.55, that's the percent as a decimal, times the 120 price will give you $186. You can choose to solve this type of problem either way. And the last one is a discount. Find the sale price if a CD is $14.50 and then it's 10% off. So going the long route, we're going to figure out what 10% of 1450 is. So you could either take 10% and change it to a decimal and say 0.10 times 1450, or you might know that 10% means 1/10 of something, or dividing it by 10, which just moves the decimal one place to the left. So $1.45 is the discount. Now to find the selling price, you're going to take the regular price minus how much you're going to save, which means the selling price is going to be $13.05. Now the shortcut method, if something's 10% off, you're going to pay 90% of the price because it would be 100% minus 10%. So if we want to figure out 90% of 1450, it would be 0.9 or 0.90 times 1450, and that would bring you right to $13.05.